Well, welcome everybody. This is week 4 of Uptown lockdown here. We are some of the Duke Ellington Society UK. This week I have my mate Frank Griffiths just below me here, Quentin Breyer over to the left, and our special guest, again, all our guests are special, but this week particularly special, this week, is Michael Kilpatrick, and he'll be talking about his research into the Ellington archives later on. So, to start with though, Quentin.
Hi. I wanted just to say a few words about the New Orleans suite and play another of the portraits that Brian played one last week, the one portrait of Sidney Bechet. These were recorded just over 50 years ago, amazingly, on May the 13th, 2 days after poor Johnny Hodges died and his trip to the dentist famously. The portrait of Mahalia Jackson it's the last track on the album, last track on side 2, and it's an absolute cracker. It's a real gospel-y feel to it. I wanted to mention it for a couple of things. One was that it was one of the tracks that in 2013 at the London Jazz Festival they had a sort of Duke Ellington Day down at the South Bank, and it ended with Orphy Robinson and Cleveland Watkins doing a sort of DJ set, and they were playing Ellington tunes over a full disc jockey setup, and that they played Portrait of Mahalia Jackson. Sounded absolutely fabulous, sort of top volume in the South Bank. Sirius, that was organised by Sirius, obviously, who's, as we have to mention, John Cummings, the boss of Sirius, sadly died last week. The other thing I wanted to mention was that it features, there's quite a lot going on. There's flute, there's Russell Prokop, I think, on clarinet, Peter Williams growling away. Later on there's a little bit of Paul Gonsalves. And in the end there's some preaching on the trombone from Julian Priester, who wasn't in the Ellington band that long, probably much more famous for being in the Sun Ra Orchestra. But I must just say that 3 years ago, Ken Steiner, the great Ken Steiner of Seattle, a pivotal figure in researching jazz,
Indeed, hello
researching
Ken.
Duke Ellington, etc. He came over to the UK and he attended our AGM, and he stayed at my house in Ealing, and I remember I was on the bus, the E2 bus from Ealing Broadway station back to our neck of the woods, and his cell phone rang, and it was Julian Priester ringing Ken from Seattle. He had no idea, obviously, that Ken was in London, but I was gobsmacked that I should be on an E2 bus in London next to a bloke who was having a chat with Julian Priester. So there we are. Ken on that trip, incidentally, I persuaded him to go down to Cheltenham to go and see Snarky Puppy, and he was there on the famous night that Chris Potter sat in the Snarky Puppy. You can see it all on YouTube in its glory. And Ken was very grateful for that. Anyway, this is a portrait of Mahalia Jackson, and it's an absolute belter of late Ellington. And Anthony's going to play it now. Yeah, that's right. Yes, Norris Turner on flute. A nice bass note at the end. Julian Priestley, yeah. Formerly of the Sun Ra Orchestra and currently still a resident in Seattle and Maitland Klinsmanners.
Hello, Anthony. How are you? I thought I'd give you a little reminder of our rather disastrous, well, not disastrous, trip to Washington about 2 months ago for the Ellington conference,
Yes,
which was cancelled on the morning it was due to start, which was rather unfortunate.
that's right.
I know that you stayed around as long as you could, but I left a couple of days later. But I went there to kill several birds with one stone. So I wanted to pop into the Library of Congress and also the Smithsonian. Because as you might know, the Library of Congress now has the collection of Billy Strayhorn manuscripts and business papers and such like, which has been open to the public for, I think, just over a year and a half or thereabouts. And of course, it's within walking distance of the Smithsonian,
Of
the
course.
National Museum of History.
Yes.
Have the all the Ellington papers. So on that week, when was that? The week beginning the 8th of March, was it, or 9th of March?
Yeah, that's right. Yes.
Yes, our conference was due to start in Georgetown on the Wednesday evening. So I managed to spend 3 days, 3 whole days at the Library of Congress looking at the Strayhorn papers,
Well done.
which was a bit of fun. And I managed to cram an awful lot in, to be honest, because for those of you who don't know, the collection of Duke Ellington papers at the Smithsonian is quite enormous. There are some 480 boxes or something of, archive boxes 4 inches tall of manuscripts, music, and so on, plus lots of business papers. And that you could spend months and months and months just barely scratching the surface. But the Strayhorn collection amounts to only, I think it's 38 or 39 boxes of music, which actually includes a few Ellington scores too. So I, believe it or not, I spent 3 intensive days actually going through every single box just to have a look around and familiarize myself with what was in there. As a result of that, we have a couple of tracks to play, which I'll explain why. But I think it's fascinating to observe from the Strayhorn collection just how many arrangements he must have turned out that weren't, as far as we know, performed. There seemed to be quite a lot of scores from maybe late 1939 and early 40, when he started arranging for the Ellington Orchestra. Probably lots of arrangements for standards, which I don't think have been performed, because I spotted quite a few titles and quite a few scores which appeared to show only 4 saxophones. So this is just pre-Ben Webster. So he was already in full swing, churning out compositions and arrangements for Ellington as soon as he'd got on board. There are probably all sorts of things that maybe in the future I might go back and look at and see if they're of any musical interest, because you can't always tell just by staring at a page. But I thought I'd like to begin by asking you to play one of the tracks I've requested. And I'll explain why, because in my several visits to the Smithsonian looking at the Duke Ellington papers, I've always had a few little sort of targets. I was sort of hoping I might find manuscripts for such and such a piece, or trying to find the missing page of a score for something. And I've always quite liked the song from 1940 called "So Far So Good," which I think you're familiar with.
Yes.
And the reason for that is because there are, as far as I can see, there's absolutely nothing in the Smithsonian, in the Duke Ellington collection. No manuscripts, not a single scrap or a surviving band part. It's almost as though it didn't exist, which actually is quite unusual. And for those who are listening who don't know, you'll actually find that the Smithsonian collection of Ellington papers, and Strayhorn, of course, contains a significant majority of their actual output. Most things have actually survived, so it's unusual to find no trace of any piece of something that was actually recorded, something that you know about from his records or concerts. So I sort of had it in mind that maybe, guessing that So Far So Good was arranged by Strayhorn, I might happen to find a score. And lo and behold, on my first day, I think it was in the afternoon, I was looking through one of the boxes of manuscript sketchbooks where they have lots of doodlings and complete scores. And there was an untitled score, which I almost passed over because it's one of those things you don't always recognize straight away by looking at the page, which is one of the difficulties. If the vocal melody isn't presented in front of you, you've got to look at the orchestration behind it and recognize all the orchestral figures. And there it was. I suddenly realized I was looking at the complete Strayhorn score to the song So Far So Good, which maybe I'll get to play that with my band, maybe later in the year if I get round to putting it into Sibelius and producing it. So would you like to put So Far So Good on?
Oh, I'd be delighted.
Big romance are hand in hand. Take a peek at the future. What do you see? Such a romantic future for two, for you, for me. So now you're mine, so all is fine. I'm so lucky in love, knock wood, so far so good. At the future, tell me, what do you see? Such a romantic future for two, for you, for me. So now you're mine, so all is fine. You're the key to paradise. You're so grand, so fine, but let me knock on wood. So far, so good.
Thank you, Anthony. I thought I'd continue talking about Strayhorn arrangements and compositions and ask you to play something which demonstrates the frustration I sometimes find in looking for these things. I have one or two little favourites. I often look at the more obscure parts of the Ellington repertoire to play with my band, rather than do all the top 10 favourites everyone else does. And so I occasionally pick out a few little oddities and rarities. And one of those is a Strayhorn piece from 1941, for which I happened to observe that in the Smithsonian collection, there were no scores or no band parts surviving other than the double bass part, which just has the roots of each chord every 2 beats. So it tells you very, very little, which you can't actually hear on the recording. And of course, I was hoping I'd be able to do that with my band because for various reasons, I'm rather fond of this piece. So this is one of the rare occasions in which I've tried to transcribe an entire piece by ear from the recording, which is actually a pretty thankless task because especially for the earlier works, you know, the fidelity is pretty poor, and when you have these, you know, these especially on sort of up tempo things with percussive brass sections, you really can't make out inner parts very well, and I just find it very unrewarding. For something a bit slower or more gentle, it's slightly easier to pour over a recording and go over and over again until you can pick out the inner notes and do it. So I thought I'd have a go at this piece a long time ago, and one day I'm hoping I'll maybe find a page or two of score or some parts that will sort of let me know how disappointing my attempt was or how accurate it was. So this piece is a Strayhorn composition from 1941. It's available on the standard transcriptions set. There's a set of 2 CDs, 1941, and this is called "Have You Changed?" Anthony's holding up a 16-inch disc version of the. Wow. Okay.
I don't think it's quite the same record, but it's one in that series.
Oh, okay.
Let's play the MP3 now.
Thank you. Thanks very much, ladies and gentlemen, for such a warm, wonderful, warm welcome. You're very beautiful, very sweet, very gracious, very generous. And all the kids in the band want you to know that we do love you madly. you will notice that we have a friend visiting with us tonight, and the reason Paul Gonsalves does not have his tie on is because he loaned it to Ben Webster. And he was having a little smorgasbord and schnapps? No schnapps. No, and he was talking about Ben and the old, talking about it. Romantic, and recalling beautiful incidents. And, the emotion grew, and he compounded the dream into the vanishing point of the necktie. And Ben Webster, being the heroic type man that he is, of course, now plays the part of the martyr. He comes in and says, I will speak for Paul Gonsalves. Ben
All Too Soon there, by the Duke Ellington Orchestra, with guest, very special, in I think 1971, possibly in Copenhagen, Ben Webster. And Michael is back with us. Michael, so the piece that you played featured Ben Webster, didn't it?
Ben Webster and Harry Carney, and Ben Webster has just a fantastic sound. I was just listening the other day to someone on Instagram, someone in Japan who does excellent renditions of both the Ben Webster sound and the Hodges too. And he had a collection of saxophones and mouthpieces. Right, listen, I commented on the fuff at the end of the note where Ben Webster goes fuff fuff fuff, and that the fuff is as important as the note itself. And I think is very true of Ben Webster's sound. So shall I carry on with the Strayhorn theme?
Yes,
That's
please
do. Little All Too Soon into it. And that's Strayhorn too, of course, isn't it? Library of Congress, yes. Well, as I was saying, one of the fascinating things about the Strayhorn collection, as well as the quantity of unusual works which he produced, and of course there are several unknown pieces which Walter van der Leur, the Strayhorn scholar, published and performed with the Dutch orchestra to bring some fresh Strayhorn to the world. There are also lots of sketchbooks, unfinished pieces, little ditties, little half a page of music, a few bars. And one of the fascinating things is making little tiny discoveries, such as fragments of manuscript which contain sketches of parts of Such Sweet Thunder, the Shakespearean suite. Now, as you know, Strayhorn composed a couple of those movements. One of those is I think what most people would describe as a masterpiece is the amazing Up and Down, which describes the antics of Puck in A Midsummer Night's Dream, who repeatedly makes several pairs of people fall in love with each other and out of love. And this is represented in musical form by several duets, and interchanging duets from the Ellington Orchestra, composed in a very linear fashion, and with some amazing harmonies and counterpoint. I discovered in some of the sketchbooks in the Library of Congress collection a few pages and sketches of Up and Down, several bars of the duet section from the first half of the piece, what appeared to be an extra page, which looks like it fitted in the middle of the piece, which I haven't actually looked at properly yet, which is interesting in itself, because you do often find that the Ellington and Strayhorn compositions were often longer than the recorded versions we're familiar with. They often wrote extra choruses, which they deleted or put in different orders. But it's fascinating to see bits and bobs of Such Sweet Thunder, because I think I've noticed from my looking around the Smithsonian collection, not very many what I would call works in progress in Ellington's hand. You can often see pencil marks and faint rubbings out underneath the pencils where he's changed his mind about something, but to find several pages of little sketches of melodic line or harmonies, and then the same thing again, slightly different, it's actually quite unusual. So I think maybe a lot of these little bits of paper were perhaps thrown away unless they contained a whole chorus. So it's fascinating to see that. Another interesting observation, which I think we mentioned on the Ellington email group, was that hidden away in the Strayhorn collection at Library of Congress is a single sheet of paper with the title Bottom, and that refers to the Shakespearean character. And this one page of music actually has the middle section of the piece we know as Sonnet to Hank Stank, which featured Richard Goodman on trombone. So one's left wondering whether the original conception of that piece wasn't to describe Henry V, it was to describe the character Bottom. Of course, it's not the first the first movement in Such Sweet Thunder, which was retitled or reused other purposes. So perhaps, Anthony, you'd like to continue by playing the absolutely fantastic composition Up and Down from Such Sweet Thunder.
I'd love to. I have the original issue take, and I assume that's the one that you're most desiring.
But the one with the correct ending on, where Clark Terry does some vocalization
Sure.
with the trumpet. Yes, which we can describe, which we can explain later.
Yes. I'm not sure if correct or incorrect describes these two, but certainly. So hopefully, crossed fingers
Right.
here. We have the correct performance.
Thank you. That was the excellent Clark Terry vocalizing at the end, saying the words, "Lord, what fools these mortals be," through his half-valve trumpet. So I've got one more piece, Anthony, which you might like to listen to, but it's not real. Not real at all.
Right. Fake.
It's
It's an imposter.
it's computer.
It's fake
No, it's
music. That's what it is.
Fake music? No, it's real music. It's put together on Sibelius on the music software I use,
Sure.
because there's no known recording of this, and I didn't know what it was called. In the Library of Congress, it's titled "Any Time, Any Day, Anywhere," which you might recognise as something Ellington recorded in 1933 or thereabouts. But of course, this bears no relation to that piece of music, because a lot of the time people mistitle things when the title is in shorthand. So I think you should just, maybe people listening will recognise it. I didn't recognise it until I asked around. So perhaps you should just play this piece,
It's a quiz.
which is called Anywhere, and see who recognises it. It's entirely electronic,
Stick
and it's
your
a
hand
feature
up.
for... Who?
No, stick your hand up if you recognise it, I'm saying.
Oh, right. Yes. This is a feature for Harry Carney on baritone saxophone, and you should imagine him playing around with melody in the second half. But have a listen to this electronic music of a Strayhorn arrangement and see if you recognise the melody. And there we are, the piece entitled Anywhere. Did either of you, Anthony or Frank, recognise that?
No,
I did.
there's so
No.
much music that's been written though, isn't there? So it's hard to.
Yeah.
But there is. At one point, it sounded like some kind of slightly dreary pop song that somebody might have been singing at some point in the mid 20th century.
Well,
some kind of
actually,
slightly
yeah.
lamentful kind of thing going on there. But anyway, I just want to say thanks so much to Quentin. He's got to go off to do other things, but I'm sure he'll be back. So Michael, yes, please tell us.
Yeah, well, actually, it's a Strayhorn arrangement of a piece by Sammy Kahn and Jules Stein, called Anywhere. So obviously, its title was simply just Anywhere, not Anytime, Any Day, Anywhere.
Right.
And it was a popular song, and I half recognised it. I knew I'd heard it, but I couldn't think of the name until someone asked around and Walter van der Leur popped up with the
Well,
composer.
can I just say
Right.
that I feel relatively comfortable with the music of those two composers, and I've never ever heard that title before. So it's not popular. I mean, it was probably a popular song when it came out. I would imagine in the 1960s, late 60s. Does that sound about right?
I think maybe a bit earlier. I can't remember.
Okay.
You can find it on YouTube. It's from a musical, so you can
Yeah.
find a video clip of people singing it, and then you recognize it straight away.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
Good to hear it, though. I just didn't recognize.
Yeah. So that's a perfect example of something arranged by Strayhorn we never heard Ellington play, despite the fact there's actually a full set of parts written out for the Ellington Orchestra.
Yeah.
Did they rehearse it? Did they do it at a live gig? We'll never know.
Well, the Ellington Library, which is played regularly by the Lincoln Center Jazz Orchestra, has a similar song. I have to look it up. That was also arranged by, maybe from the same show. I reckon it's probably from the same show.
Oh,
And it was. I'm sorry, I can't provide any more details, but it's not a song you would associate with Ellington, but
No.
it was clearly it's published, and there's a lot of examples of that. Those kinds of songs arranged for the band during the 1960s when they were on the Reprise label, which of course was Frank Sinatra's label, and
Yes,
they did a lot of pop albums, didn't they? I say pop in the sense of the songs. They did a Bob Dylan song, didn't they? Remember
they
that
did,
one?
Blowing in the Wind, yes. Yeah. Well, they also did, of course, an album taken from the All American musical, so it's called All American in Jazz.
Yeah, I believe that was with Dave Brubeck, who was involved in that as well, and Louis Armstrong. I think so. I'll have to look up the album. But
What's on that one? That was yours.
there was a musical about 1963 that included a lot of people, and Louis and Dave Brubeck were both involved. I'm sorry if I'm getting it mixed up with something else. It rings a strong bell. Yeah. Can I ask you a question about the scores?
Oh, yeah.
I haven't recently seen the Ellington scores that you probably have seen a lot of, from the Library of Congress. And I presume that Duke had his own copyist that traveled with him for many years. And he had a unique way of putting the score out, okay, because of the way he voiced his instruments.
Yes.
And apparently, Duke would give him piano scores, and the copyist, maybe you can correct me on this, several lines of piano scores, yeah? And the copyist kind of had to figure out what was for what sometimes. And apparently, Harry Carney had his own clef. So can you imagine, like 4 saxes in one clef, and then Harry's parts being lower because it's bari sax, and you're a baritone saxist as well, had his own clef, which is quite an honor to be given your own clef. Do you remember some of the Duke scores, just the ones you have or seen? If there was anything distinctive about them, the way they were laid out?
They all have that, or almost all have that system of scoring where you have the 3 or 4 saxophones on the top staff, and the next one down is Harry Carney on his own, and he's written an octave higher than it sounds. So it's written in
Yeah.
treble clef, an octave
So they
higher.
have to adjust
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
And then you have the trumpets below that, and then the trombones below that. And if there are any bass notes which he wants to write in specifically, he'd put those in with the trombones, but with the stems downwards. So it's a very compressed, most of the time, just those four staves, the whole band, which works very well. It's a very neat system, actually.
Yeah, because you mentioned the baritone, the bass parts, which, as you know, writing for big band and bass players is always an interesting challenge because a lot of bass players could prefer to play the chord changes, don't they, as opposed to written notes.
Yeah.
And I would have thought in Ellington's music, having not seen those scores too much, a lot of the bass parts were probably written out to a certain extent. You found it otherwise?
The answer is yes and no, because the bass parts generally didn't have chord symbols on, mostly.
Okay.
But they mostly had what you might call a think bass line. So it'd be even when the bass player is expected to be walking, as in playing, four to the bar, there'd just be two notes per bar on beats 1 and 3, often showing just the root or tonic, and there'd be some lines where Duke wanted specific notes to appear. So there'd be some written bits, some arranged pieces where there's a rhythm playing with the ensemble, but mostly no chord symbols and just the sort of root and fifth. And often it themed as though the bass player would be expected to realize whether they're playing a major or minor chord when it was not obvious from what was written. So no, there are no chords. It's a very, very, very minimal, probably a bit confusing. You have to listen to what's being played around you and then iterate through until you worked out what the exact chord variation is.
Well, from a band leader's standpoint, and both of us are band leaders and of course play a lot of Ellington music. Obviously, my band less than yours does, but a lot of bass players who play in small groups are very capable about coping with chord symbols, aren't they? And they also have great time and rhythm and musicality and swing and all the kind of hallmarks of a good bass player that you want in your band. But there's often cases, not all the time, maybe less than half the time, where the bass players aren't particularly confident with their reading skills. Yeah. And as a band leader, playing, if you want to call it prescriptive bass parts, how do you sort of, if you like, balance that equation of being a very talented bass player and swinging and doing all the things that the rhythm section should be doing, but in fact not always getting the figures? How do you kind of moderate that sort of tension, if you know what I mean?
Oh, wow.
I mean, I'm not asking you to mention any names, but
well,
it's always a challenge, isn't it, to have a bass player who's not as confident with the reading?
Oh yeah, I mean, for my own band, which is basically an amateur band, although I have a few excellent musicians in it, I do actually transcribe the bass parts completely from the recordings, and I put the chord symbols in.
Good.
And that's one case where you can't really rely on what Ellington wrote, because it's not what people expect. They at least expect chord symbols. I do find that when I have some fantastic local bass players standing in on the occasion, they're quite capable of ignoring all the written notes, which perhaps might visually get in the way on the page, and look at the chord symbols, I think.
Right.
And my own double bass player actually does quite like the challenge of trying to read some of the lines as well.
Yeah, I think they interact much differently with the band. Musically and emotionally, when they can nail the written parts, because that puts them in a different context than if they're just kind of keeping the beat going, When I have a younger player, or perhaps I'm not as experienced reader player in the bass chair, I do all I can to encourage them to, nail the part. And I often try to give them recordings beforehand. I don't know if you've had that, where a particular player in the band will ask for recordings with the music, because that enables them to internalize it better,
Well, I do provide recordings for most of the band, and I have a few who do like to listen to them and absorb the style, because generally I actually make life quite difficult by not annotating the music at all, for the horns that is, and I put in front of my band very much the bare bones of what Ellington musicians would have seen themselves, without all the alterations for the note durations which a modern session musician would expect.
Oh, absolutely.
So they have to learn to know which notes are going to be actually shorter than they're written. It's a very economical but vague system of notation. You have to learn how to play it. Although it's reasonably systematic too.
I think the drum parts are key issue of this, because I did know and play with one of the drummers in Ellington's band for several years in the 1980s and 90s in New York. His name was, he's still around, his name is Steve Little.
Oh, yeah.
He's on the album And His Mother Called Him Bill.
Mm.
Of course, was made just after Billy died. And he told me that when he joined the band, there was no drum pad. Or maybe it had been temporarily lost or something.
There was never any drum pad at all of any description. Never.
Ever.
Never. No. Everything that you hear on the recordings, they worked out for themselves, and that was it. They just discussed with Ellington what sort of thing he wanted, or they'd do it themselves, and Ellington would say, "Okay, that's a good idea. Let's keep it that style." And it's just all on the fly, and in their head.
Well, I played a lot with another drummer in New York who had played with Woody Herman and all kinds of great big bands, And I used to write for him in a big band context when we played together. We also played in a small group, but he told me this would probably be quite a different approach than what you're saying about Ellington's band, and that he really appreciated, and drummers really appreciated, having as much information on the part as they could to do with articulations, obviously dynamics, and things that a horn player requires. And I found that interesting, because he was a very natural player and great ears, and he didn't really need it all spoon fed to him, but he just advised me that that's really useful. So,
well, that's certainly true. But the thing is, from my perspective, as someone who runs an amateur band which rehearses regularly, which is of course quite a luxury, because professional bands don't meet every week. They very, very, very seldom do that. So I have the luxury of people learning the piece inside out and remembering what's going on, whereas professionally, especially the session musicians, are expected to be able to sight read excellently and play excellently, but they are therefore expected to have detailed information in front of them on the page so they can reproduce what's required. Whereas, going back to what I said earlier, I put the bare bones in front of them, because I'm able to rehearse over and over again and have the luxury of time in that sense.
Yeah, well, a copyist I had for a few years, he was also a band leader and a sax player, and he always put drum guide on the drum part. It didn't say drums, and what he meant was a kind of a bare bones part, and it wasn't actually any rhythms written out that the band was playing. He might write out a key figure at the beginning or at the end, to kind of really, make it dramatic. But it just essentially gave him a map of the chart, what's happening, some dynamics, and left it to the drummer to do the rest. And I do a lot of teaching, and in all my big bands I've taught, and my jazz workshops, which can be big band size, like 10 people, 10, 12 people, I never give the drummer a part. And that's not just to be cheeky or whatever, but I do it because the drummers generally can learn and memorize the piece, especially if it's a jazz tune that, are quite well known, because it's a workshop. It's not an original thing, like a Latin tune, St. Thomas, or different style of music than swing jazz. They tend to embrace it and own it quicker than if they were staring at a page of music, you know. It's not like going into 5/4 and 7/4 and, you know, it's going straight ahead. And I think that Ellington may have, in a way, thought similarly, you know. Plus, he had the luxury of having the same drummer all the time, you know, until a new one came in. But it must have been very difficult for Steve to join the band and be performing with them and not know what's going on. If it was a piece of Ellington's that he didn't know. But
I suspect they all learned very quickly.
yeah. If
Which,
you're
of course,
playing
is
several nights a
relevant.
week, I would imagine you could do that.
Yes. Yeah.
But if I could just talk about one of the greatest, probably the most famous song of Strayhorn's. Well, one could argue that it is Lush Life, which he wrote in 1936 and was a grand age of 18, was it? Or 19, maybe? Let's say 19, you know. As he was born in 1915, wasn't he?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And a song that's often associated, or more often associated with lyrics, meaning that singers do it, yeah. Although so many great instrumental versions of it. I don't know how well familiar you are with the instrumental version. John Coltrane recorded it instrumentally in the late 50s, which was quite a new thing at that time. And of course, a number of saxophonists have played it, have recorded it. But I think it's unusual. It seems unusual because the lyrics are so profound and telling. Were you? Did you see any evidence of that song at the museum?
It's funny you asked that because Lush Life is, as you say, quite an important Strayhorn work. But actually, I for very many years I knew next to nothing about it, and actually I've never really paid any attention to it.
Sure.
Because I just tend to look at all the other obscure things, as I said earlier on.
Yeah, fair dues.
But so actually, Lush Life, it's in some respects, is quite new to me. I mean, I've heard it obviously, but I've not seen manuscripts for it or anything relating to it.
Was there any truth in the story that Ellington, Ellington invited Billy to his apartment in New York, didn't he? In the early stages of their relationship, and Billy played him some of his songs, didn't he, in the flat, and one of which was
yes.
I'm not sure if that's kind of more apocryphal, but that's when they did meet.
I'm not sure if the specifics of that are true. It's certainly true. It's certainly claimed that Strayhorn then played and said, "This is how you would play it" to Ellington. He then played it like Duke Ellington.
Yeah,
which is one of the things that made the impression on the Duke at the time.
But I mean, the number of singers that have recorded it is extraordinary. I mean, you can essentially say more clearly who has not recorded it. You know, probably the first non-Ellington version of it was Nat King Cole. Okay.
Right.
That was about 1949. Does that sound about right?
Maybe, yes.
Okay.
Have you got an unusual recording of it to play for us now?
Yeah, I'm going to play you if we have time, Anthony, because I know Michael has to. Can you hear me, Anthony? Yeah.
I can. Okay. Yes. I was just actually typing in our little chat there. Let's play it before we get cut off.
Well, how about if we put our skates on here? Can we play Lush Life track 10? Just before you start it, it's Joe Henderson, great saxophonist, playing the tune completely a cappella from his 1994 recording of this song, Lush Life. Right. Perhaps a bit presumptuous or whatever, but to do my own solo version after the great Joe Henderson. But there you go. At least it's live. And sadly, Joe Henderson is no longer with us. But he recorded an album called Lush Life, strangely enough, in 1994, sort of at the end of his career. And he recorded all Billy Strayhorn songs with a sort of six-piece band. I think Wynton Marsalis played on a few tracks. And this is the one you heard just before my version was the last track of the album. So very appropriate that he should finish it off with an a cappella piece, rendition of Lush Life. Now, related to that, here in the UK, we have still with us the great Peter King, who is a great saxophone player, and he has made a practice of playing his own solo version of that song as well. So if you do happen to see Peter King listed as playing somewhere, I believe he still plays a bit in London where he lives. So that's another person to check out in terms of Lush Life. And just before we move on to the next track, I just want to say that Michael and I were discussing this, that Lush Life has got such brilliant lyrics, of course, and so many lyricists, I should say singers, have recorded it, all the way from Nat King Cole, Sarah Vaughan, Diane Reeves, Johnny Hartman, who recorded it with Coltrane, actually. And we just could go down the list with singers. I'm sure Sarah Vaughan did it, Ella. Anyway, so it's not as commonly played instrumentally as other standards, but it still has it works well in both instrumental and vocal context. Now, another song that it's got a similar kind of poignancy and sort of melancholy to it without being depressing is Gordon Jenkins' song Goodbye. Now, Gordon Jenkins, I believe, wrote this in the 1940s, and I believe that he probably wrote it for Benny Goodman. I'm not sure if he did specifically, but Gordon Jenkins, many of you will know for all the great arrangements and a few of his songs for Sinatra over the years. But he also wrote Goodbye, which was recorded by Sinatra at one stage. However, the version we're going to listen to that I prepared for Anthony to play for you was written, I should say, recorded in 1962 from an album, perhaps one of you gentlemen can help me, something about the great big band days. It was all big band songs arranged by Ellington and Strayhorn. Probably about 23
Was it
tracks.
was it
With
when
two albums.
the big bands come back, or something
Yes,
like that?
thank you, thank you. I have the CD in the other room. I should have left it in here. Anyway, yes, let's just call it When the Big Bands Come Back. It was recorded between 60 and 62 in that there were two LPs, and it was both condensed onto one CD for a 1989 release. But extraordinary arrangements, as you can imagine. Um, and there were all kinds of big band numbers on it that were from everyone from Tommy Dorsey to Jimmy Lunsford,
Mm.
several Jimmy Dorsey's band, all these great big bands that rose to their height in the 30s and 40s. And of course, there's a couple of Ellington compositions on there too. I think it don't get around much anymore. But the bulk of the albums, the two LPs, are non-Ellington numbers in terms of the compositions. However, we talked a lot about over the last two shows about the Johnny Hodges book, Rabbit's Blues, and how that Johnny Hodges was, in a sense, a vocalist with the Ellington band in his style and his very lyrical and profound kind of interpretation of ballads, especially. Many of the great Billy Strayhorn standards, I should say ballads, were played by Johnny, and includes Passion Flower and Prelude. Well, that was Ellington, Prelude to a Kiss, wasn't it? Daydream, which was written in the early 40s, which of course is often sung as well. But Johnny Hodges just rides to great heights emotionally on this version of Goodbye, arranged by Billy Strayhorn, and I think the second of the two big band LPs. I could also say, as a clarinetist, the parts that Billy wrote for the clarinets, certainly Jimmy Hamilton, if not another clarinetist, I think there's two clarinets on this arrangement, are brilliant too. And they get a very Ellingtonia Strayhorn sound to them. It kind of answers to the melody. The melody is particularly, I wouldn't say staid, but it doesn't have loads of notes in it. You know, it's quite lyrical and long held phrases, and in no better hands than Johnny Hodges. So could you play us, Anthony, Goodbye, track 21? Hello? That was Johnny Hodges, recorded in 1962. Billy Strayhorn's fantastic arrangement of a Goodbye by Gordon Jenkins. And it was also interesting to me because of the very lush and decorative arrangement and the clarinets flitting about and the very dark textures brought about by the lower brass and mutes, which of course is very Ellingtonia sound. But for those of us that like to distinguish between whether it's Ellington or Strayhorn, I very clearly heard Strayhorn sound there. Now, I'm going to attempt to give you another rendition of that song on a clarinet this time, so safely staying away from trying to emulate Johnny Hodges on alto. The clarinet is a very distinguished sound, different sound than the saxophone, as clarinet players and saxophone players know. Different sort of challenges to play on the clarinet, to tackle on the clarinet. And one of those is the command and embracing of what's known as the Chalumeau register, which is the lowest register, the lowest notes in the clarinet. And so I'm going to play it in the same key as Hodges did that you just heard, but I'll be playing it actually an octave lower, which is quite a nice sound for this song, I think. We'll just have to see. Right, that was Goodbye by Gordon Jenkins. And of course, those of you that follow the big bands or remember having interest in the big bands from the 1940s will recognize it as Benny Goodman's theme. I believe his theme changed over the years. One of the songs he also included as a theme was the Let's Dance, which is much more upbeat. But yeah, that's a little bit of Strayhorn for you this week. Thanks to Michael's presentation of this wondrous visit to the Strayhorn collection. Is that correct? Is that what it's called?
Strayhorn collection at the Library of Congress
in Washington.
In Washington, D.C., yeah.
A town that does not have a state. It's not an estate, is it?
It's a district. It's not actually a state. It's a sort of little world of its own.
Well, just picking up on
No,
what
that's
you were
right.
saying.
A quarter of it is in a state, Virginia, sort of.
Yeah.
There we go.
And the other three quarters are not. No.
Well, it's in the state of Baltimore, Maryland. Maryland. That's what I meant to say. Michael, just picking, or perhaps Anthony will have a idea about this as well. I realize it's still early days after this aborted conference.
Sure.
Are there any plans or hope that it will be happening at some stage?
I've heard nothing
Yeah.
myself. I've heard nothing.
No, I haven't heard anything either.
I don't think anyone can forecast the rescheduling at this
No,
stage.
that's definitely. I mean, um, you know, a number of us, how many? 20 of us, Michael, actually made it there,
Yeah.
something like that. And we had a concert on the Wednesday evening, sorry. And at that point, it was scheduled that the conference would go on the next day and the day after, down from 3 days. But I arrived at sort of 8:30 or something in the ballroom there at the conference centre at Georgetown University on the Thursday morning, and it was all off. And
Yeah.
Anna there, the organiser of the conference, was booking people on flights back, on her laptop. All very sad and quite emergent at that time. And of course, as far as the impact of the event at the moment on us, that was quite early, although clearly not early by world standards at that point. But yes, it's going to be very difficult for people to reschedule anything or to schedule anything like that in the future, I think. We're definitely going to have to wait a few months or even a year or so to see how things play out.
Yeah.
Well, clearly, things 2 months later, which is when it happened, exactly, when it didn't happen. We're still in early days as far as making up things. I'm sorry to announce that I just found out today that my concert at Liverpool's Philharmonic Hall, which was scheduled for the 25th of October, has been postponed due to the fact that they're still in lockdown, of course. And as a result, many things scheduled well after their hopeful ending of the lockdown at Liverpool Philharmonic Hall will be scheduled later. So it's all kind of in flux. But I just think we need to just live with these uncertain times as far as concerts.
It's going to be very difficult for concerts.
So let's, without getting on to that morbid, the sort of unhappy topic of the state.
Sure,
of things.
but people sitting very close to each other, enjoying communally any kind of performance, I think it's going to be very awkward in the near future, certainly. But we'll just have to see, won't we?
Absolutely. And in the meantime, for those of you who aren't busily sort of sautéing your garlic for the eventual spaghetti bolognese you're going to be making for your dinner, we are hoping to meet on a regular basis every Wednesday for 5 o'clock.
That's right.
Greenwich Standard Time.
No.
And play good music for you. And we welcome any of your comments. Anthony, do you want to mention?
Yes, I could have mentioned it earlier, actually, couldn't I? But I didn't. We have a chat room on Discord, and that's where we encourage people to reach out to us and also to communicate with each other. And there's a link to that, I'm sure, on our Facebook page, if that's any help. So go to the Facebook page, Duke Ellington Society UK, and somewhere there'll be a link. If there isn't now, there will be later, a link to our Discord chat room. Yes, I've just been looking, actually. Not a lot of comments, but at least the stream seems to be holding out more or less at the moment. I did get one comment that there's an Art Pepper, my namesake, nearly, version of Goodbye, so that would be worth looking out for, or indeed,
Yeah, I know that version.
or indeed up
from the
at some
screen.
point. But no, the public room is very quiet. There we go. But anyway, probably because I didn't mention it earlier. But take it as read. That's where we can. That's where everybody. We the organisers and Michael's not on the committee, but the committee members of the society, but also regular members and anybody else can join in.
Well, people can also make comments on our Facebook page, and we welcome that. If you do have access to Facebook, go on to the Duke Ellington Society of UK, not Duke Ellington Society, because that will take you to another country, which we don't, there's nothing wrong with doing that as well. But if you can just send a comment if you like, tell us if the live music was out of tune or if I missed a couple of notes, which I did. But also, more importantly, if you have a particular request of a Ellington or Strayhorn piece you'd like to hear.
Indeed, like Charlie did with Solid Old Man earlier, yes.
I think we have access between several of us on the board of pretty much everything Ellington that you might request.
Yes, if you give us a bit of notice, we can find pretty much anything, yes.
And
probably not absolutely anything. Don't tax us too much on that. It's early days for us in this broadcasting lark,
Well, I'll tell you what, if we don't have the song you requested, we'll certainly play something that has many of the same notes in it,
Indeed.
Which would be useful. Also, there's lots and lots of writings, biographies and studies about Duke Ellington, of course, and a few that are readily available about Billy Strayhorn, and of course many of their members of their band. So if you have any questions or anything to do with those opinions or views, please, let us know what they are, and we could possibly discuss those.
Sure. So comments and topic suggestions, anything like that. Please, just drop us a line on Facebook. We even have a Twitter somewhere out there. I'm told. But the so-called social media, they do spread you a little bit thin. So it's good to have one central place. So I would direct people towards the Discord channel that we've got for general chat.
Also, in addition to our Facebook page, which I'm sure has its information on it, we have the Duke Ellington Society website. Anthony, can you remind us of what that is?
It's simply dukeellington.org.uk.
Okay, dukeellington.org.uk.
That's right.
That has a lot of information on it.
It does, and it has. It's going to have even more. So there are exciting things happening there. Perhaps we'll get Charlie on some time to tell us about that.
Yeah, those forums between the ones we just mentioned, we always invite people to become members of the society if they're interested in the music.
It's definitely an option, guys and gals out there. Absolutely, yes, please do.
And you can find all of that on dukeellington.org.uk.
They're very easy to join up. They can join up with PayPal, and then you will receive, of course, a copy of Blue Light. Hang on, where is my copy? I was looking at it earlier. Every 3 months. Every 3 months, you'll get that delivered to your actual house or other abode.
Can I also add that we hope to have, I'm sure will, another special guest next week, including, not to the exclusion of the people here today or last week, and in that case, we'll give you as much notice as we can about who that might be. But regardless of that,
yes,
I think you'll be more than happy with what we have in store for you on any given show.
Oh,
Michael just
so goodbyes, They do take they do drag out sometimes. Yes.
Michael has just agreed to come on again.
Yes. So there you go. Brilliant stuff. Super,
Stay
super
home
stuff.
at the library.
All
Thank
right,
you very
guys.
much, Anthony. I
So
think
that's right. So I had planned to spend the next week after the conference, rather than before, at the Library of Congress, not just for Strayhorn, but for other completely non-ducal purposes. But it was, of course, closed, as was the Smithsonian. So all of these things, I'm sure there will be a time for them all in the future, with any luck.
Okay.
So thank you. Thanks to Quentin earlier, very much for being here. Thanks to Frank, of course, Stalwart, and our special guest this week, Michael Kilpatrick. Thank you so much.
Thank you, my pleasure. Thank you.
So I thought I would, because I can.
I was trying to do per diem.
Yes.
I couldn't manage it. Terrible.
So we will, hopefully, you will see us next week. Meanwhile, I'm going to end with the stereo version, the other version of I Will Lead Them Up and Down, from the Shakespeare Suite.